Hi, thanks very much, Papa.
Yeah, it's really nice to have you. As I said earlier, I will focus on the the story of the band, some key tracks for me that I want you to describe for me in the earlier career and now, and lineup changes and what's happening in the band, life on the road, all that. And I will try to make it quite short because I know you are a busy man.
Okay.
Yeah. I will start with the Let's Go Back tour. And do you remember the moment you realized that therapy was more than just a hobby?
Well, the moment I realized that it was more than just a hobby was when we began. We started a brief history of the band. We started out playing around the north of Ireland in 1989, and we had made, as a lot of punk and noise bands did, then we made cassettes. All we did was we gave them out to friends, and we had them at gigs. We sold our first 7-inch single. So we had we were at college, some of us had day jobs, and we pressed up 1,000 vinyl singles. And we only did that to have a souvenir of the three of us being a band. But we noticed that in the punk scene in Ireland, we started playing to more than just 40 or 50 people at local punk shows. We started to get quite a following. And it began to take up more and more of our time. You know, I was working, the other two guys were at college when the band started. And we wanted to play music a lot, but we ended up signing to Ouija Records, which was part of the Rough Trade Group in the UK and Europe in 1991. And in turn, they licensed those records to Touch and Go in America through Quarterstick. Now, at this point in time, whenever we were signed to this record label, I still had a job. The other two guys were trying to juggle college life. And it got to the point where we were being offered gigs in Europe. There was talk of gigs in America. And we couldn't really keep our jobs in our college or do the band at the same time. It was impossible. So the other two guys in the band put college on hold. I worked in a factory, which was all right, but it wasn't what I wanted to do in my life. So I thought, well, now is as good a time as any to hand in my resignation. And then, you know, at least I can concentrate on doing this. And you know, the other two guys might be in college, but I can consider it. So around about 1991, the summer of 1991, the two guys contacted their colleges and said, look, well, we're going to take a break. And I got in touch with my boss and said, I'm going to resign. So that was kind of it. Now, the idea then was to maybe we were all young, was to maybe do something in this crazy music business. You know, like we were an indie band, we were playing small gigs, and let's see where this takes us. But I think that was the point in time when we decided, well, we'll give this a few years and see what happens. I mean, I do think the other two guys had always planned to go back to college. And I'd always thought, well, I don't know how long this will last. You know, while I'm young, I may as well do it. But we ended up being professional musicians.
Yeah. And what was your kind of factory day job at the time?
I worked for a very well-known tire company. And my job was to check the construction of the tires with a computer to make sure that the structure of the tires, I had to examine them with an ultrasound and make sure that the structure was fine. And I had to go around various parts of the as the tires were manufactured, I had to check them at different stages to make sure there were no faults. So it wasn't a bad job, but the tough thing was it was shift work. It was what they call it. So there would be 1 week I'd be working from 3 in the afternoon till 11, 1 week from 11 o'clock at night to 7. So it was classic factory hours. And on one side, it was exhausting, but it also gave me lots of time to come up with ideas for songs. Because, you know, at 2 o'clock in the morning on a factory floor, when it's really quiet, you know, you've got all that space in your head to write songs.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And what was your emotions when the last time you signed off from the factory job?
Well, I didn't really know, because it wasn't like I signed off to become. I didn't think I was going to sign off and become a rock star. I thought this was a different chapter of my life. You know, I'd left school. I'd done various jobs after leaving school, and I got this job with the tire company because it was very well paid, and it meant that I could buy amplifiers, guitar, and records. You know, I could buy a lot of vinyl records. And after 3.5 years doing this, I thought, it's not really what I saw myself doing with my life. You know, when I was at school, when I did further education, I didn't really see myself doing this, and I'd always wanted to do something within music, or within journalism even. But I think whenever I left it, I was leaving behind a very well-paid job, and I had an apartment and I had a car which had to be paid for. And I thought, you know, I'm going to have to come up with money to pay for this. So I ended up selling my car, and I was in rental accommodation, and the guy I was living with said, well, you know, if you pay me some rent in advance, then, you know, hopefully if you can make some money from music, then you can pay me the rent when it comes in. Yeah. So it was frightening. You know, the other two guys, they were in the middle of their college education, and in Ireland at the time, college education was paid for by the state. So it wasn't paid for by yourself as it is nowadays. Nowadays, you pay for your own education. So they had to go and seek special permission from their deans of college. Could they take time out to do this? Otherwise, they would have had to repay the money that they had already received from the college for their education. So that's the way it went. So yeah, I think part of me was very excited, because I think having to do the band gave me a chance to take a step away from a factory job that wasn't my dream job anyway. But, you know, I'd always wanted to do something in music, so this was a good chance.
Yeah, definitely. And how would you describe the scene, the music scene in Northern Ireland around that time?
It was difficult. So whenever we started the band, it was still during what's known in the world as the Troubles, the political conflict. So Belfast city centre wasn't the most lively. It wasn't like other European cities, because there was always a chance of terrorist attacks. There was always a chance of violence. So there weren't that many concert halls to play in. So there was, I think, 2 or 3 venues where you could play. And a lot of our initial gigs were through a punk collective called Warzone, who put on lots of really great bands. You know, they would put on lots of thrash, punk, and crust bands, and they would put us on shows in various art colleges and university reformatories, places like this. But it was very, very difficult to get concerts. So a lot of our early concerts were small rooms in the colleges where the other guys went to university. It would be art colleges. It would be art galleries, things like this. It wasn't like this nowadays. The good thing was the punk scene had a really good community, so people traded cassettes, and people helped like that. So there's a small underground. In the south of Ireland, it was a bit different, because there were more concerts. So we soon found out when the band started, we couldn't play as much in Belfast, but we could play in Dublin, Cork, Waterford, Limerick, in the south of the country. And our name got well known as being like this kind of noisy punk band that were slightly unusual. They weren't just hardcore. So we would get invited by other punk communities around the country to come and play for them. So we would play agricultural colleges, we would play art galleries, we'd play things like this. So that's how we started out, and it was mostly within Ireland, but it was very, very, in the north of the country where we were, it was difficult, because there wasn't really an established music business or scene. It was really just a punk scene we worked in.
Yeah. And as you said, there were troubled times. Growing up must have shaped your outlook. How did that tension and environment feed into the sound and attitude of therapy?
Well, I think, you know, because we grew up with the British Army on the streets, because we grew up with thousands of people dying, but innocent civilians as well as paramilitaries, as well as politicians, we actually didn't know that the rest of the world was different. Because when you're a kid, and you know, I was born in 1965, so the Troubles had started. You know, I was born into it, and it was it was only really when we got older, to 13, 14 years of age, that we realized that it was quite fucked up, the situation that we lived in. Now, the band, when we started, is mixed. You know, there's a Protestant, there's a Catholic, and there was a member who had Protestant and Catholic parents, so we were completely split religiously and down the middle. Politically, we weren't sectarian. We were very much for peace. We agreed with the idea of Irish unity, and we were a band that wanted everyone to get on. You know, we were from a generation where we'd seen what politics had done to the country of Ireland, and we wanted people just to get on. Now, we weren't alone. A lot of people of our generation looked at their peers in the UK and Europe and said, you know, people can have 5 or 6 concerts a week. You know, in Belfast, bands don't want to come over and play because they're terrified. They think it's like going to, I don't know, the Lebanon or something like that. They think there's going to be bombs. So a lot of bands didn't come. Now, one thing that did happen was punk and metal bands came because they weren't scared, which is great for us. So we didn't realize at the time how much it shaped it, but we didn't know at the time that it shaped our sound, although with retrospect it did. But what it did do was it gave us a great sense of community. So I grew up in a mainly Protestant area, was educated at a Protestant school, which would be kind of seen as British, and very much in the British sphere. Michael grew up a Catholic, nationalist. But when you went to see a concert, that didn't matter. So if you went to see Napalm Death, or you went to see, you know, Susie and the Banshees, nobody cared, because all those kids just came to the one concert hall and then they go on. So when you start making music, you realize that everyone's the same as everybody else. Yes, there's different political agendas, there's different things going on. So for a lot of people, it was an escape. Now, historically, punk rock, there's so many documentaries and films about punk rock in the north of Ireland, and it was, I can honestly say, I was 14, 15 when that all happened. Stiff Little Fingers, The Outcasts, Good Vibrations, really. It just brought everyone together. And that was one of the things. So it was somewhere to escape. It was, I think in modern parlance, you would call it a safe space. Mm-hmm. So football matches weren't a safe space. They were sectarian. Not some national holidays were sectarian, but if you went to a punk or a metal gig, that was a safe space. So you know that you could go there and no one would ask what school you went to, what politics were. Do you know what I mean? What politics your parents were. You could go there and hang out with people. And that was it. So looking back on it now, because it was so intense, that probably explains why a lot of our music is intense and agitated and aggressive. You know, and it's because of our background. We didn't realize it at the time, though.
No, as so many times before, the music unite people instead of divide, and you find a zone of freedom that you didn't have in society in general, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that was it. We found somewhere there that was completely devoid of bigotry. Yeah. So, I mean, everyday life in the north of Ireland is divided along lines of British or Irish. And growing up, I hated it. I wanted everyone, and it sounds really, really idealistic and really naive. I just wanted everyone to get on. And we would see on the news every day people dying. You would see hatred on an everyday level. I would see friends of mine at school that were very Protestant and loyalist to the British government, would hate Roman Catholics, would hate people that supported a united Ireland. And I could never understand this. I thought, well, nothing is worth someone's life over this. And I didn't just feel like this. Lots of people my generation did. So that was our way of dealing with life, and music became almost like a lifeline for everyone that I knew.
Yeah, I remember growing up as a kid in Sweden. I saw the thing on the news, and it was really scary because I was a little child and I didn't understand the reason for the conflicts, and I didn't understand why people have to kill each other. So it was scary times.
Yeah, it was frightening. I mean, you grew up amongst it. I mean, it's bizarre because you know that. So I mean, looking back on it now, so at the height, the British Army were on the streets everywhere.
Mm.
So if you went into Belfast city centre to go shopping, they had a ring of steel around the city centre because there had been so many explosions. So if you go to a football match, there's a turnstile that you walk through to go into the stadium.
Yeah.
They had those to go into the city centre. And you know, if you go on an aeroplane now, you go through a machine to get checked. Back in the 1970s and early 80s, you could check going into the city centre. And also every department store, big department store, as you walked through the door, you held your hands up and someone ran a machine up and down to make sure you weren't carrying firearms or explosives. Now, at the time, I grew up with that. So we would go into Belfast once every fortnight or with my mother and father. Now, my uncle had moved to Leicester in England, and it really sunk home to me. So when I was, I think, 11 or 12 years of age, we went to visit my uncle, and he lived in the UK and in England in a town called Leicester. And we went shopping, and me and my mother walked into a department store. And as soon as I walked in the door, I held my hands up, and my mother tapped me on the shoulder and said, "No, people don't do that over here." And then I realized that the world I lived in was completely different from other people in the UK.
Yeah, I can understand. As a listener, what was your first main experience as a concert visitor or playing the vinyl or cassettes?
I liked music from a very early age. My mother used to play records around the house, old rock and roll records and things like that. And I remember hearing Elvis and Roy Orbison records. But the very first music that I loved was the Buzzcocks. And I remember they had a hit called Ever Fallen in Love with Someone You Shouldn't Have.
Yeah.
And it was played on national radio. So I was having my breakfast before school one day and I heard it. And I heard the name Buzzcocks. Now, there was a couple of older guys than me at school that were punk rockers. They had kind of Johnny Rotten hair. And I'd seen Buzzcocks written on their school bags. And I thought it would be really, really aggressive and scary. But this is like a beautiful record about sadness. And a guy that was 2 years above me, I asked about the Buzzcocks, and he recommended some records. And I bought Ever Falling in Love, the single, and I bought Love Bites, the album. And then after that, a few weeks later, I heard the Undertones that were like Ireland's version of the Buzzcocks, and I bought their album. And then from there on in, that was me hooked. We went on a family holiday to England shortly afterwards, and I bought a vinyl copy of Nevermind the Bollocks. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I got those were the first records I got were punk records. Now, the first concert I ever went to, there was a little punk scene on the outskirts of Belfast, and it was very DIY, and there was, as I said to you earlier on, Tampa, there were no places to play. Now, 4 local punk bands had got a school hall in a school. I mean, you know, where you have assembly in the morning and the teachers tell you this is what to do. And they'd managed to say that they were going to put on a rock concert. So could they rent the hall? So I think they were charged £5 or something. And these 4 punk bands, Music for the Deaf, the Allotropes, Pure Mania, and somebody else, can't remember, on a Saturday afternoon played. And that was my first concert. And I was probably 13. And my parents dropped me off because they thought, well, it's a school, you know, it's safe. And there was just loads and loads of people with spiky hair and Damned, Sex Pistols, Stiff Little Fingers t-shirts dancing around to this loud music. And that was my first concert. I got the bug. And my second proper concert of an established band was then Susie and the Banshees, who came over to play in Belfast on the Join Hands tour in 1978. I went to that. And then since then, I saw the UK Subs and people like that, and Stiff Little Fingers, and that was it then. So kind of that was what got me into being really serious about music, collecting vinyl, and I actually wanted to play the guitar. It was the Buzzcocks made me want to pick up a guitar.
Yeah, that was my next question. Which band was the one that made you go from a listener to music to being a band?
Well, it was the Buzzcocks because I used to belong to, there was a youth club a youth group club on Wednesday nights where you would go from 7 o'clock until 9 o'clock in an old church hall. And there would be about 40 or 50 kids aged between 12 and 16. And there'd be various activities. It was to keep kids occupied. You know, there was no internet or anything then. So And one of the things they had was guitar lessons. And initially, I wasn't really interested, but a neighbor on our street, they had a brother of theirs, an elderly brother had died. And someone called to our door one day and said, Andrew likes music, doesn't he? My brother has died and he used to have this electric guitar. Would Andrew be interested in it?
Wow.
And have it? And they gave me a Shaler semi-acoustic guitar and a little small tiny amplifier. So I went to the youth club and there was a guy called Brian Armour, I remember his name, and one of the things he did was give guitar lessons. And I thought, well, I might not be able to play guitar. So I told him, would I be able to play guitar? And he said, well, the best way for you to learn would be tell me what kind of music you like, tell me what songs you like, and I'll see if I can teach you that song. So I brought him in, and he was a fan of Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple and all this kind of stuff. So I brought him in the Buzzcocks record, and he went, oh, this is kind of like the Ramones. It's like, he said, this stuff's really easy. He said, I'll show you a bar chord. And he showed me how to fret a bar chord, which you just move up and down the neck. And he said, if you learn this shape, you can pretty much play Undertones, Sex Pistols, Ramones. So it took me a while to get used to playing this chord, but whenever I got it home, I realized I could move a bar chord up and down the neck and keep the guitar. As long as the guitar was in tune, it sounded fine. And that's what got me into playing the guitar, was this guy at a youth club that showed me a bar chord.
And what was your parents' initial thoughts about you creating music, playing music?
Oh no, they were really, really happy, because I think parents in those days, we lived in quite a rough housing estate, and it was run by loyalist paramilitaries. So a lot of people that grew up in those areas, like if they would look for kids to join their organizations, especially bored kids. So quite often they would get young kids to do errands for them, like delivering firearms or, being lookouts. And a lot of parents that didn't want their kids getting involved in this, but if the kids were bored, kids get bored really easily, and something like that can seem exciting. So for my parents, the fact that I would go every Wednesday night, learn guitar, and then whenever I was at home, I wouldn't be out on the street where they didn't know where I was. I'd be at home with my headphones on, trying to work out Ramones songs. So they were pleased.
I can imagine. And did they ever told you about their feelings for therapy?
Well, they're not. My mom and dad, whenever the band started, they thought it was a hobby, which it was. And then whenever I went professional was 1992, because we signed a major record deal with A&M Records. And I'd said to my dad, I said, look, I'm actually going to go professional now. And my mom and dad, I was living in a flat, my own flat. I moved out of home a long time ago. And their first thought wasn't, oh great, you're signing to the same record label as Janet Jackson, Sting, and Bryan Adams. Their first thought was, well, the kind of music you play, will you still be able to pay your rent? Will you be able to get a wage? And I explained to them that because of our punk background, all the money we got from A&M, we actually put into a band account, and we paid ourselves a wage every week, which was probably the most sensible thing we ever did as a bunch of young people. And they went, okay. And then I think that year we played the Ulster Hall in Belfast, which was their biggest ever Belfast show. It was the year Nurse was out. We had an album called Nurse, and it had a couple of hit singles in the UK and Ireland on it. So we played to nearly 2,000 people, which was a really big deal. So I invited them to the show, and they came and they got seats in the balcony alongside Michael and Fife's parents, the special VIP area. My mother had never been to a rock concert before. She hadn't been to a concert since she was probably before she was married, and that would have been somebody like Gene Vincent or something like that. And I think whenever the gig started, people started stage diving, and my dad always laughs about it. Apparently my mother stood up and ran towards a security member on the balcony and said, you need to get down there, there's an enormous riot, those kids are beating each other up.
Yeah.
she didn't realize that that's how people behaved at gigs.
No.
But they would support, they would support the band. All our parents actually in the band were very supportive, but I don't think that it was their kind of music. So my father would occasionally come to gigs But I think my mother had been once, and that she didn't get the kind of music, it was too loud, so that was it for her. But once she knew that I was making a living and could pay my rent, she thought, well, that's okay, I'll leave him to it.
She was satisfied with that.
She was satisfied with that, yeah, as long as, you know, as long as she knew it wasn't it wasn't some kind of fantasy I was living in.
No, of course. And speaking of your earlier career, I choose tracks that cuts me deep, and one of Innocent X. I think is ugliness in the best way, and it feels like pure sonic and anxiety. Sorry, I don't know. But what kind of headspace were you in when that song was created?
Well, I can remember exactly where I wrote the song. So it was, I'd lived away from home for a while, and then I had to come home whenever I decided I said bye-bye to the factory, and I had to leave my apartment, and I was back home living with my parents while I sorted somewhere else to live. And I had a really beaten up old car, and I'd been up to visit Fife, the drummer, in his apartment. And we had was a bunch of us, and we'd all taken acid one night, and it was like kind of one of those nights where there was about 20 people all taking acid and listening to music, and it was really good fun. And then all of a sudden I realized that I'd ended up on my own, and it was frightening, and I couldn't drive home because it was so fucked up. And then I had to wait until the next afternoon, and then I didn't want to drive home with any LSD in my system to my parents' house, and I was exhausted. And I think what had happened was, while I was on the acid trip, I'd begun thinking about things that had happened in my life, and I was terrified of not making the right choices. And I think the opening line is this real or is it a dream? I can't seem to tell the difference anymore, was the effects of the acid trip. And then I didn't really know what I wanted, and my emotions were heightened by the drug. And it was in my old bedroom. I'd almost come home to my old bedroom, you know, my early 20s, where I'd been when I was 17, 18, and thought, I'm back here, you know, what am I doing with my life? And the music, we'd written the music a few weeks before in a band rehearsal, because we were listening to Belgian New Beat, and we really, really liked the really kind of insistent pummeling of it. And we got the title from the painting by Francis Bacon, Innocent X, which was terrifying. But it was almost like the song was about someone tearing themselves apart, trying to look for answers. And it was I'll never forget, at one point, whenever I wrote the song, I was actually on my room with fear on the floor of my old bedroom in my parents' house. And as the line goes, love and death die on the dirty floor. And I was so conflicted, and I couldn't see a way out of where I was. I mean, the effects of the drug didn't help. But it was one of those things when I'd written I'd wrote all this down. The lyrics were written in 15 minutes whenever I was in this awful state. And then several days later, we had another band rehearsal, and we had the music, and I said, I've got some lyrics for this. Let's see if these fit. And the band went, they're perfect. Keep them.
Yeah. Emotional, and a song written out of your own experience with handling drugs. Do you say that it was a wake-up call for you?
It was, because it was it made me realize that, you know, I think I've always maintained that in my life I don't really dabble much in drugs or anything like that, and I've always thought that if you're happy within yourself like that, that was a wake-up call to me to get somewhere in my life that I felt happy. And after that incident, I thought, right, you know, I'm going to throw myself into doing the best I can with the band. I'm going to make sure that the accounts for the band are looked after, that we always rehearse, you know, that I gave myself a rigidity. I thought, you know, because it was kind of, I was scared of becoming untethered. So I'd left a job, I'd gone after the band thing, and I hadn't got any focus with the band. And I think that song Innocent X was at the end of that experience in my parents' house. I thought, I need to focus on this now, because I didn't see at the time it would be a career, but I thought if I want to do this for a little while, I have to do it with a clear vision and with a focus.
Cool. And that early EP sound, for me, I experience an industrial confrontational edge. What were you listening or influenced by back then?
Well, if it's Baby Teeth, it would have been Ministry. It would have been Big Black. It would have been early Sonic Youth. Tad, we were really into Tad as well.
Oh.
Skyward on that album is a really bizarre one. That was so all the stuff like Animal Bones. It was influenced by Ministry. Me Abstract was influenced by Ministry and Tad and Big Black. But there's one song on the album called Skyward, which, and it sounds bizarre now. We watched a documentary on television, man, about Jimi Hendrix. And we were kind of having fun in rehearsals, and I wrote a kind of Jimi Hendrix riff. And we all started laughing, and it became a song, and it sounds absolutely nothing like Jimi Hendrix, you know what I mean? But that was the one song on the album that wasn't influenced by the classic noise rock industrial side of things.
Yeah, not many people mention Tad. I really think they are one of the greatest band of that era. And I had the opportunity to meet Ted Doyle, a nice person and a great musician also.
An amazing guy. I mean, he just dropped his ambient album last week.
Oh, I did. I missed it.
It's on Bandcamp. It's under the name Thomas Anthony Doyle, I think it's called. It's on under that, but it's like a dark ambient album. It's amazing. Oh. But we were very lucky. I mean, we loved Tad. They were one of our favorite bands. The three of us in the band liked different kinds of music, but there were certain bands that we all loved: Big Black and Tad, Ministry, Public Enemy. And then really early on in the band, one of the gigs we did in Dublin was opening for Tad. So whenever Baby Teeth was out, we got a gig. It was a small art space. There was only 150 people there. And we were the first band on. And afterwards, our drummer was smoking marijuana, but he was doing it from a can. So he would put a hole in the can of beer, put that in marijuana and smoke it. And Tad Doyle came in and said, "Hey, you guys are having prison breakers." And we said, "What?" And he went, "Yeah, prison breakers. That's what we call these in Seattle." And then on our second EP, we have a song called Prison Breaker. And then in 1994, when Inhaler was out, we did a North American tour opening for that. It was probably one of my favorite tours I've ever done, because those guys hung out with us every night. And we got to see them play every night. I mean, they were so fun. We hung out together. You know, quite often when you go on tour with bands, you don't really hang out with the bands you're on tour with, really. You know, it's not always thing. But some of those bands, Jesus Lizard, Helmet, and Tad, we had a lot of really good fun with. We've always loved Tad. And then we did an album in 2001 called Shameless that we recorded in Seattle. And we met Tad when we were over there too. You know, we got to hang out with Tad again. But no, I mean, those albums, Salt Lake Gauze Balls, you know, Inhaler, they're masterpieces. They sound incredible. And I think one of our favorites was Jack Pepsi, the single, the 7-inch on Sub Pop, Jack Pepsi. We all had that in colored vinyl. I love that. I mean, I was listening to them the other day, and we were talking about them in rehearsals the other day because we have a new song, and Michael wrote the opening riff for it, and it kind of goes, and we're going, "That's amazing." And then we're going, "What does that remind us of?" And the end's going, Tad.
I think they deserve more attention that they ever have. Very great band. And the next song, Neck Freak, I think it's a relentless song, almost violent in its energy. What do you remember about recording and written that song?
Well, we had I went, whenever the band formed, I was really, really into kind of certain dance musics because I was always interested in that. And one of them was Belgian New Beat, which was almost like an electronic body music, industrial, dark. And a lot of it was terrible, but some of it was a lot of very Eastern modality in the chords they used, and a very kind of direct four to the floor, which was very much to me like noise rock. And I got this New Beat compilation album whenever I was in Amsterdam on holiday with a friend, and I went to a New Beat club in the Melkweg in Amsterdam. And the next day I went out into a record shop and got a New Beat compilation. We were obsessed with it, the three of us in the band. So Neck Freak, I got this kind of like echoey guitar sound and started playing like a synth line. Now I must admit, Svampa, the original version of Neck Freak, it was about 15 minutes long, and that was it. It's just me playing that riff, and the only thing changes are the drums. So initially we did the track almost like a dance track, so there was no verse, chorus, bridge, none of the stuff that originally ends up on the song. It was just almost like Pan or Noi. It was one of those kind of it was like a 15-minute piece of music where just the drums changed, but the guitar did the same thing. It was like a pulse. And then myself and Five sat down and wrote the lyrics. And the lyrics were about absence. The absence is that people leave in your life whenever you leave. And that's where it came from. And that gave it a little bit of structure. You know, and initially, I think what happened is when we did the recorded version, Harvey Burrell, who was our friend, he was an engineer. He was in-house engineer for Southern that worked with a lot of bands like Fugazi and Rudimentary Peni. So he did the first album on a Major. And he turned up and we played him this 15-minute New Beat thing. And he went, okay, if I'm going to produce this record, guys, we can't have a 15-minute New Beat track on the record. So let's sit down and think about what the best bits are and put them in some order. And he did. I mean, there are live versions of the album before the album, or live versions of that track before the album was released that do go on and on and on and on. But yeah, and it's one of those tracks that I love playing. We did a tour about 2-3 years ago called Love Your Early Stuff, and it was in the set. And it's just such an intense track that we didn't know before we played it, that if we played it to our crowd, especially after Troublegum and Infernal Love, when there were pop songs there. But it's one of those songs that live with a great deal of volume, it's hypnotic and people just surrender to it. And I still love playing it to this day.
It's like the same vibe when you listen to krautrock.
Yes.
The hypnotic feeling.
Yeah, like something off Noise 75 or something like that. You know, one of those. Yeah. Amazing
band. Do you ever miss making music with that kind of reckless urgency?
All the time, but we have recorded a lot of stuff that is like that. You know, we've got unreleased stuff which is like that, but I think because we've got so much experience now, when we do stuff like that, we always judge it. Is this too retro? We sort of think. Sometimes we'll sit down and we'll play a couple of like riffs like Neck Freak, and we'll all just lose ourselves and we'll record it. And then we overthink it. We think, is this too retro? But you know, we do that quite a lot. Actually, we were in rehearsals the other day and we had this little riff that was a bit like an electronic riff, and we did the same thing. So it'll be interesting to see when we narrow the songs down for the album if it makes it the album.
Yeah. And during a long career, as you have, there, of course, are shifting in lineups and learning curves. How do you think those shifts have affected the band's sounds and chemistry?
Well, hindsight, which is a wonderful thing. I mean, looking back at it, I was, Fife Ewing was a founding member of the band, really great friend. And when he left, it was a great loss. When I look back at it, and this isn't meant as any disrespect to Martin McCarrick or to Graham Hopkins, I don't think that period as a four-piece is reflective of what the band truly is. I think Graham and Martin joined a band that had great success, and I think naturally they expected to join a band and that success to continue. And when that didn't happen, it caused a great deal of friction, because I think they were joining a band thinking that the success of Infernal Love and Troublegum would continue, and it didn't. And they found that very difficult to deal with. And I think that also made it very difficult for myself and Michael because we felt a great deal of stress. We also surrendered quite a lot of the creative control, which we'd never done before. You know, myself, Michael, and Fife had always kind of had the music. And we were very lost until we reconnected with Neil Cooper. Now, Neil was in an amazing band called The Beyond. And in 1990, when we had released a single, we did 6 shows in the UK with The Beyond. And Neil was only 17 at the time. He's an amazing drummer. And funny, Fife, our original drummer, could be quite arrogant about drummers because he had very high standards. And quite often we would say, oh, we've been listening to this. And Fife would go, that band is terrible. The drummer is shit.
Mm-hmm.
He thought 90% of drummers were shit. But one of the drummers he really liked was Neil Cooper from The Beyond. And whenever I accidentally bumped into Neil in 2002, whenever we were looking for a drummer at a rival schools gig. And I was saying, oh my God, I haven't seen you in ages. And we reconnected and he joined the band. And within several rehearsals, it was almost like we said to him, if you'd have joined the band in 1996, 97, it would have made it so much easier. And then he told us that when Fife left, he was thinking of auditioning.
Mm.
He didn't think that we'd remember who he was and be interested. But yeah, no, so I mean, the band, ever since Neil Reed, and especially I would say since 2009, since the Crooked Timber album, it's the best it's ever felt. And the good thing about Neil Cooper is very much like Fife. We can talk about krautrock, we can talk about Metallica, we can talk about Tad, we can talk about Public Enemy, and he listens to all of that. You know, unfortunately with Martin McCarrick and with Graham Hopkins, their world was slightly more narrow when it came to tastes in music. Both very good musicians, but they wouldn't have understood or wanted to understand a lot of the bands that we like. And having Neil back in the band it's like the old days. I mean, whenever we rehearse, we spend so much time rehearsing, and then when we stop rehearsing, we talk about music we're listening to, and then we play each other what we're listening to, and then we'll get an idea and we'll go back and rehearse some more with those ideas in it. And that's the way therapy always used to be at the beginning.
Yeah. And speaking of lineup changes, how did the lineup changes affect you personally as a songwriter and a performer, if it?
Whenever Fife left, I mean, towards the end of Fife's time in the band, I was writing most of the songs anyway. It got to the point where Fife found it really difficult touring and being in a band, and he was always quite depressed. And I found myself writing most of the songs, not the drum parts. Obviously, he was brilliant. He did a lot himself. Obviously, he was an amazing drummer. And what happened was whenever that came, we were an established band on a major record label. We were an established alternative rock band that had sold a couple of million records. And unfortunately, whenever we became a 4-piece, there was a great deal of pressure on me to deliver hit records. And I couldn't do it. I crumbled under the pressure. I found it really difficult. And I found I was trying to juggle writing really catchy songs like Nowhere, Scream Major, Die Laughing, Happy People Having Their Stories with what I was listening to at home, which wasn't popular alternative rock. It was still noisy underground rock, you know. And also the thing about therapy is, you know, once we'd had a bit of success, that's when people start talking about sales. So you've got me under pressure to write these kind of songs, and you've got 2 members that have just joined this band wanting to be in a successful band that they've seen from outside. And I didn't handle that very well. I didn't know how to handle it. But I think then whenever Neil Cooper joined the band, that completely changed because it was so relaxed that I didn't feel I had to write songs for other people. I felt like the 3 of us in a room could just be really comfortable with each other and write songs for ourselves.
What you describe are writer's block?
No, but I think I had a great dip in quality. I think we did an amazing record called Suicide Pact You First, which I really liked. And then we did this album called Shameless, which everybody wrote, which was that sounded like there wasn't that. I mean, to me, we did it with Jack and Dino. We had a great time in Seattle with Jack and Dino producing it, but it was one of those things where there wasn't one vision for the record, and it just sounds like a bunch of ideas people had that were thrown in, and that was really disappointing. And then we did High Anxiety, which was not a bad album, but it was a bit rushed. But it was only really after Never Apologize, Never Explain in 2004 that we kind of got right back focused again. Yeah, so I've never really had writer's block because I remember reading an interview with Nick Cave years ago. You know, I always loved Nick Cave as a kid, right back to the birthday party and The Boys Next Door. And he just said the most important thing to get rid of writer's block is just to write. He said, just write. And I think sometimes with hindsight, we should have maybe taken a break, you know, because I think to a certain extent, Semi-Detached took 3 years to do, but it was done in between a lot of touring. Shameless was written really quickly. High Anxiety was written really quickly, and there was no quality control. And I think that's what I've learned. And I always write songs. The most difficult thing I find getting older is lyrics. Music's never a problem. I play guitar every day. I write songs and record music every day. But the lyrics, for me, they have to be right. It has to be uniform. Every album we do, it has to be from the same place. And that's the only thing that I find difficult as I've got older is finishing lyrics that suit the music.
Yeah. And as you said, you have done a lot of touring during your days. What are still excites you with touring today?
Well, I actually really enjoy touring now because whenever Neil joined the band, we have the three of us really get on. And we sat down. It sounds like a focus group, but we sat down when Neil had joined, and we were several months in. And Neil was asking us what it was like when Fife was in the band, what it was like with Martin, and what it was like with Graham Hopkins. And we told him, and he said, well, let's just have a rule that the three of us, the minute one of us pisses the other one off, we say straight away.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you're probably aware, but musicians are very passive aggressive. And then in the past, it would be, we would have problems with Fife, he would have problems with us. No one would say anything. And then maybe at 2 o'clock in the morning on a tour bus, because someone hadn't slept, would go, I never liked that song. I hated that song. You know. And we said, well, let's avoid that. And that changed everything. We had that discussion with Neil. And to this day, honestly, that was in 2003. We had that discussion. We don't have rows anymore because we know we can say to each other straight away, we don't like this, we don't want to do this. And it makes all the difference. So I enjoy touring a lot more now.
Yeah. And how do you think that the current lineup influences the dynamic on stage?
The dynamic's really equal on stage. See, I always liked, in the early days of Therapy, one of my happy places was whenever we'd be playing a gig and I was able to look at Michael or Fife and they would make eye contact with me and smile. And it sounds like a small thing, but I love that. I love going and seeing bands and seeing them do that as well. And I think that had disappeared from the band for a while because of pressure. But now whenever we go and play, the dynamic is in advance. If there's a problem with the set list or there's a problem, someone's not feeling it, we discuss it so that when we do go on stage, you've got three happy musicians playing together. And that's the dynamic is great like that. And I think it's a really good balance. We should always have stayed a three-piece band. We work better as a three-piece band. That's the perfect dynamic for us.
Yeah. And if you try to describe how the band has evolved from the earlier part, from the successful part during Troublegum and Infernal Love until now.
Oh, that's hard to describe because I almost think that some of those records, as I mentioned earlier, Semi-Detached, Shameless, Hangs Out, it's almost like another band. It's a strange thing. But we've always been open-minded musically, and I think once we did Never Apologize, Never Explain It, it was our first record in a few years as a 3-piece.
Mm.
It all made sense again.
And today, is writing music easier, harder, or just different compared to the early 90s?
It's different. I mean, the problem is with a long journey like therapy's had, it can sometimes be you end up for a little while wondering what kind of album you want to make. So at the minute we're writing a new record, and we've all got lots of ideas, and some of the songs sound completely different to the other songs. But I know that after 2 or 3 more rehearsals, the songs that make sense together, like Bedfellows, will rise to the top, and the other ones will just discard.
Mm.
But that is something which these days doesn't cause us a sense of panic, because we know what will happen. Whereas after Troublegum and Infernal Love, we used to panic because we thought, well, we need these records to be successful.
Mm.
And that's not a good place to be, because it's not a comfortable place to be. Whereas I think what we have now is we have a way of a natural selection process of songs where we know when something isn't working. And it's, you know, and it's a process that we go through. It's like everything else, but it's a good way to do it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, but I can imagine being on a huge record label with a lot of hits, put a lot of pressure to a band.
Well, I mean, we have a joke about this. So whenever we signed to A&M in '92, the guys that looked after us were young guys, and we signed for full artistic control. So we took a bit less money, but we got to choose singles, allegedly. You know, that was the whole thing. And Nurse was a cult album. It sold so much worldwide and a few hits on it. But Troublegum was a big success across the world. And what happened was, so in the days of Nurse, they would send young people from the record company, and they would be like yourself. They would talk about Jesus Lizard, and they would talk about Husker Du, and they talk about Tad. But then when Troublegum was a hit, the people that would turn up at our shows would be the people with Janet Jackson t-shirts on, that worked with Sting, worked with Bryan Adams. And they didn't talk about Tad, they talked about record sales. So it went from being, hey, these guys aren't so bad for a major record label, they like Tad too, to, you know, okay, we're not selling as many in this territory as we are in this territory. We maybe need to see how we. So that was the kind of thing you were talking about, which for a bunch of kind of punk rockers from Belfast was foreign to us. It was like, okay, right, here we are now. The fun bit's over. We've made Troublegum. It was all good fun, and we made tracks like Neck Freak, and we made tracks like This and X, and then we had Screamage Out of Nowhere, and now we're with a bunch of people that look after Janet Jackson, Sting, and Bryan Adams, who want music that sells as much as those guys, which is a big ask when you've got noise rockers from Belfast that look like this. And so we do, you know, it's not
a strange feeling to be put in that perspective.
Yeah, but it was at the time when Troublegum and Infernal Love, we were touring a lot, and it was great, and we were playing big shows. Whenever we went on stage and had a really great gig, you forget about that.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we were talking about this the other day, myself and Michael. We used to tour so much. So when Troublegum was out, we did 3 world tours. We came home, we had a week off for Christmas, and we were in recording Infernal Love. And when Infernal Love was recorded, we were over touring Australia, New Zealand, LA, Japan. And it eventually took its toll, because it was almost like, as long as we were on tour playing shows, we never had any time to sit and think about it. But then whenever we came back home and sat down in our houses on our own, you know, we were all single people at this point in time. We would come out to our apartments, and there'd be quiet. And then there would be a fax, and this is the 90s, so we'd have a fax going, have you written songs that needs to sell this amount? All of a sudden you're going, all right, shit's just got real here. I don't know how I'm going to deal with this. So that was the dark side of it, really.
Yeah, I can imagine. And as I mentioned briefly, we will speak about key tracks from the earlier stage of the therapy, and now's the time to talk about two songs from the late area. And I really are curious about your reflections about Body Bag Girl.
Well, Body Bag Girl was it was such a bizarre track. I haven't heard anyone talk about that in years. We were on tour in Seattle in 1996 as a four-piece, and there was over the years North America has been quite cold on therapy. I mean, Troublegum was a success. Troublegum did okay. All the early records did okay, but after Troublegum, no one was really interested. But we went over. But one place that was always really good for us was Seattle. So anytime we went to Seattle, we had big crowds, and people loved the band in Seattle, which was always really good. So we would look forward to getting to Seattle to play whenever we were in North America. And we went over in 1996 for the first time as a four-piece, and we went to Seattle. And as usual, it was a really great show. Lots of people there hanging out. And afterwards, we went back to the motel we were staying in. And there was a very strange girl had come back with us. Now, we didn't know who she was. We all thought she was with the record label. And it turned out she was a heroin dealer. And she was sort of sitting in the bar with us, and she all asked us how much we wanted. And we said, sorry, what are you talking about? She went, I thought you guys wanted some skag. And we went, we don't do heroin. And she went, I've got this really good stuff called Body Bag. We just looked at her and said, who on earth would buy a drug called Body Bag? The descriptions in the title there, this is what's going to happen. So we kind of politely thanked her and then put her in a taxi and told her to go away. So we'd written this kind of glam rock track. When we were doing the Shameless sessions, we were sending Jack and Dino all the demos that we'd done on these tracks. And I'd been listening to an awful lot of The Idiot by Iggy Pop. And we had this one track that was ba-dum, 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 but it was like night clubbing off The Idiot by Iggy Pop. But we didn't have any lyrics. And so we would send Jack all the demos, and we got over to Seattle to the album, and he went, the one track I really like's the one that sounds like Iggy Pop, but you guys don't have any lyrics or melodies for it. And we said, yeah, well, that's not it. He said, well, why don't you try and do something for it? And we were telling him earlier on about one of the times we were in Seattle about the Body Bag Girl. And Jack said, well, why don't you write it about this and see if anything happens. So we kind of wrote it together in the apartment we were staying in Seattle. And I tried to deliver it in an Iggy voice. And I think to make things a bit different, if I remember correctly, so it was all about this heroin dealer in Seattle. And we tried to make it like Iggy. Martin McCarrick played drums. I played bass, and I think Graham Hopkins played guitar. And I think Michael played bass as well, because I think Jack and Dino had an idea that it would sound really strange if we swapped instruments. And then I think when we toured Shameless, for the first 2 or 3 gigs, we tried it with swapped instruments, and it was a disaster. So we never ever played it again since that day. But the song, it was the Iggy Pop's The Idiot album and a heroin dealer in Seattle in 1996 is what that song is.
How was it to perform it live?
Well, I honestly think we only did it twice. I think at the beginning of the Shameless tour the Shameless tour started in Germany, somewhere like Germany. And in the set, it would be like, we would finish one song, and then Martin would get behind the kit, and I would go on the bass guitar, and Graham would grab another guitar, and then Michael would grab a spare guitar of mine. And it was a disaster the first night, and then we rehearsed it the next day at soundcheck, and it was still a disaster. We said so because we thought it might be something almost part of the show where people go, "Oh my God, we're swapping instruments. This is amazing."
It's like when the singer needs to go backstage, the drummer do something or a guitar solo, but you swap instruments.
So nobody left the stage. We swapped instruments, and I think because we didn't really know what we were doing, and it was badly rehearsed. It didn't. I think if we probably rehearsed it a bit better, and then I think Martin, when he was drumming it live in the studio with nobody watching him, He just went, "Oh, I'm going to do like a glam rock beat." But whenever there's like 800, 1,000 people watching, it's a different story. So I think, yeah, that one was consigned to the dustbin of history.
Yeah. And the next song, I wonder what was the emotional fuel behind Joy from Hard Cold Fire?
Oh, that was written by my experience looking at the world through Samuel Beckett. I was watching a documentary about Samuel Beckett, who I absolutely love, the Irish playwright and writer. And in one of his plays, he mentions, I've always had a fascination with how people live their lives and how much repetition and routine take part in people's lives. You know, some people, like my parents, and some people that I know, like to do exactly the same thing every day. It keeps them sane, it keeps them focused. And I find that if I do that, it makes me think I'm going mad. And then I read a line in a Beckett play. He said that habit is a terrible deadener. I think it was in the play Endgame he used that. And it was such a strange word, deadener. And what Samuel Beckett meant by that is that sometimes people live their lives in these straitjackets of their own making because they feel safe in a certain way of living. And that's what but modern life, I've begun to notice, nothing ever makes you happy, nothing ever brings you joy. It was a very modern, I mean, it's existed as long as time has, and long people have been around. But in the modern world, people get stuck in these routines and they don't know how to get out of them. And they, it's like, that's what that song was about. The opening line is another day, another deadener, another dull routine. And, I've experienced that myself sometimes. I've found that whether I'm playing guitar and getting bored with the way I'm playing guitar, or whether I'm getting bored with doing the same thing for 2 or 3 weeks. But the spark for that song was Samuel Beckett. And just that word deadener. I love some strange words, and deadener was such a bizarre, it's Beckettian word to use.
Yeah, definitely. And what connections do you see in between Joy and, for example, Neck Freak that we spoke about earlier?
Well, Joy, if you take away the guitar and the drums, it could be almost like a riff off an early rave record. It's like the whole reason that it's about repetition, the song, right?
Yeah.
So the whole riff. I think we were thinking of Helmet when we wrote it, because they actually have a song called Repetition, Helmet. And it was like, and it was almost like that kind of a locked groove that people get their lives stuck into. So we wanted something like that. So in the same way, it's got that same kind of repetitious groove that Neck Freak has. So there is a line you can follow from Neck Freak to Joy.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And I wonder, I played in a hardcore band when I was a little child, and I always find it very hard to not repeating and keep things fresh when it comes to me as a musician and with the themes of the songs. How do you keep things fresh?
Well, we've learned recently that certain things that we do, certain themes that repeat in our music, shouldn't be something to be scared of. Yeah. Because right up until Suicide Pact, anyone that's followed all our albums, every single album changed. Every single album was completely different from the one before. But then again, if you look at great writers or musicians, there are certain themes in the record that people come back to, whether it's Nine Inch Nails, whether it's the Jesus Lizard, whether it's Nick Cave, whether it's James Brown. There are certain things in their art. It's what makes them. And for us, the fine line is trying to incorporate those things. So, it sounds exactly like therapy, and it's like something therapy would do. And then not maybe completely panicking and jumping off a cliff and trying to replicate something really modern, because I know exactly what you mean. When we grew up, like you're talking about hardcore, we grew up on punk and noise rock. And sometimes we don't want to repeat some of those patterns from those days. But then again, that's in our DNA. And why shouldn't it be? You know, if you go and see Nick Cave still sounds like an old goth. Do you know what I mean? But it's sophisticated music he plays.
Yeah.
And that's in his DNA. And I think with us, it's the same. And the worst problem I think that we've found out is whenever you worry about not being modern enough, you know, like we could turn around tomorrow and think, okay, do we want to make a record that sounds like Turnstile? And that Turnstile record is a great record, but I think there's a bunch of people in the 50s, you know, for us to try and make a record that sounded exactly like Turnstile because it was current would be a huge mistake. Whereas we can say, well, some of those Turnstile riffs could be off a Helmet record. So you know, let's kind of meet in that. That's the place where we'll meet.
Yeah. And looking in the rear view mirror of the band's catalog, do you think there's a song that was underrated or misunderstood at the time?
There's a few songs over the years that I've really liked that I remember when we did Semi-Detached, which is an album, I like half of it. I don't like the way it was put together, and there was too much thought put into it. But one of my favorite songs that we've ever done is a song called Straight Life from that record, which I think is really, really underrated. And I think it's got everything. If you like Dancing with Manson off Baby Teeth, it's got that. It's got some of the kind of dance elements from Neck Freak and Teeth Grinder. And it's got this really almost like huge chorus in it. And I think that I remember at the time with the record label, then that was the end of the time of the record label. And we wanted it to be a single. Well, I really wanted it to be a single, and the record company was going, go with Lonely Crying Only, Church of Noise. You know, they're kind of more catchy. And I remember being devastated because I thought it was the best song on the album. So that's something that I've always liked. But yeah, I mean, there's certain songs, whenever we go back and look at albums and listen to them, it's like everything else. Some of it I think, oh, I forgot how good this was. And then other times I think, oh my God, what were we thinking? But I think that's only natural when you made as many albums as we have.
Yeah, definitely. And if, for example, Big Black would do a Therapy cover, what song would you appreciate them doing? That's not.
Well, God bless him, Steve Albini. If
Yes.
he was around and Big Black reformed it, I think Neck Freak would be perfect for Big Black. I think it would be perfect. I could imagine Albini's guitar playing that riff, and I could imagine him speaking the vocals rather than trying to sing them.
That was a really great choice. And I must get back to something you said earlier before we end this conversation. You told us about a musical process ongoing with a new album coming. What can you tell for now about that?
Well, we're at the stage now when we've got songs are in their infancy. I recently had a full knee replacement on my left knee in February. So I was in no state to get together in a room. So we haven't seen each other since last December. You know, we've talked every day, but we haven't actually been in the same room. So that's 6 months. So we've been swapping lots of MP3 files of ideas we have, but you know, it's never the same until you're in the same room with your amplifiers, guitars, drums, and looking at each other in the eye. We've already started talking about what we're not going to do. That's a big therapy thing, you know. So we're not going to put any traditional guitar solos on this record. We're going to use textures instead. There's the 3 new songs that we did recently. I'm trying to think. The guitars are in very solid rhythmic blocks as opposed to like noisy chords. They're very, very distorted. The drums are very rhythmic. It's very kind of it reminds us of kind of, I don't know what, but it's very straightforward at the minute, the songs, the ideas that we have, and we're really, really confident with them because they're great guitar riffs, but the drums aren't cliched rock drums. which is a good thing. And the bass lines, Michael's an amazing bass player, so the bass lines on this are very, very melodic. So it's I like it. It sounds really fresh. Well, it sounds really fresh.
Do you think it's a album for 2026 or?
Yes, no, they won't come out this year because to be honest, I'm getting my second knee replaced in October. So with recovery, we'll go into the studio probably December.
Yeah.
Start recording it. And then we'll Christmas, obviously everyone takes Christmas off. And then we'll record the rest of it in January, February. So it won't come out until 2026.
Okay.
But we will have songs recorded hopefully before Christmas. The songs should be written by the end of the summer.
Yeah. And a personal question, and you don't need to answer, but what has happened with your knees?
I don't know. It's I'm presuming that it's just being on stage for over 30 years. During lockdown, during COVID, I got a pain in one knee, which went to both. I go to the gym quite a lot, and I was running a lot. So whenever I couldn't go to the gym during COVID, so I would go for a run every day. And one day my knee went from underneath me, and my wife picked me up in the car because I couldn't run home. And I went to see a doctor, and he looked, and I ended up having a MRI scan on both knees. And they said, you have no cartilage in any of your knees. You'll need 2 full knee replacements. And that was 4 years ago. So there was a waiting list of 2 years for knee replacements because through the state system. So I was given lots of physiotherapy and lots of painkillers. And then it got so bad that I went back to see another doctor. And I got put in touch with a consultant who said, yeah, I can do them for you this year. So I just said to the band, look, I need 2 new knees. Yeah. We put aside this year to do it. So the band knew in advance. There would be some festivals in the summer. But yeah, no, I'm really glad I got it done because I don't know that the gait, the shape of my walk was like this. And it was really, really, really painful. And my left knee's been done, which is fantastic. I mean, it feels good as new. And the other one's getting done in October. And there'll be 6 weeks recovery. It takes 12 weeks for full recovery, but I can go back into the studio after 6. So I'm kind of looking at November, December to go back to the studio.
And then I'm hoping for some Swedish date when the new record are out.
Well, we want to go to Sweden so badly. We used to go to Sweden in the 90s, but we've always been told that there's not much interest in bringing therapy to Sweden. Our agent, X-Ray Touring, we've been with X-Ray for years. They're one of the biggest agencies in the UK. They do lots of really big acts, and they approach their counterparts. And we've been to Finland every single year. We've been to Denmark a few times, but Norway and Sweden, we're always told this. We always, because people like yourself, people get in touch with us and go, when are you guys coming to Sweden? Whenever we ask our agent about it, he says, no rock agent really wants to bring therapy to Sweden. I've no idea why.
Shitty bookers, maybe.
Well, they go to different bookers, and bookers say, well, we're not sure there's enough interest to warrant bringing the band over. But, we used to play to quite a lot of people in Sweden in the 90s. I mean, those people there might still be around.
I'm here. I saw you the first time. It might be in my memory are not that good, but I might have seen you in Hultsfred.
Yeah, we played Hultsfred. That's right.
Yeah, and that was huge.
Yeah,
amazing. But we're hoping for some Swedish date. Otherwise, I need to travel where you are.
Well, we will ask. We've got. We always ask every single time we finish an album. We do sit down with our booker. And he's our main agent. We go, we'd like to go to this company, this company, this company, this company, this company. And he comes back and says, okay, you can do these countries, but these countries are one. Now, what the promising news about that is recently, we were told for a long time that Italy didn't want therapy back. Italy have started booking therapy gigs again.
Yeah.
We've started going back to Switzerland. You know, we always were popular in Germany, Belgium, France, Austria, but we hadn't been to a lot. But all the countries that Troublegum was popular in have kind of tailed off. But hopefully, if also the age that we are, you know, a lot of people that were therapy fans in the 90s had kids, stopped going to concerts. Now those people, the kids are grown up and they've started going back to concerts. So maybe Sweden, that might be the way.
A third era of the band.
A third era of the band, hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. And one last question I'm really interested in. What kind of music attract your ear canal right now as a listener?
What am I into at the minute? Oh, let me just tell you what, I'll check what's on. I've made a playlist on my phone of what I'm listening to, and that will give you an up-to-date one. So what's on my phone and what's my playlist at the minute? So I like a band called Chalk, Chalk from Belfast. They've got a song called Afraid. They're a young band, but if you like wax tracks, you know, that old kind of wax track Chicago sounds like that. I like the Youth Code album, No Consequence. Yeah, that's really, really good. There's a punk band called Sex Scenes that I really like at the minute. There's a really good band in the UK called Believe in Nothing, which is like the UK version of Chat Pile. It's all little vignettes and stories about life in broken Britain with a really sludgy track. American band called Chumhuffer, punk band, I like them. And I also like on Hyperdub Records, there's an electronic artist called DJ Haram that I like. And also there's the record label that we're on, Marshall. There's a band called Knives from Bristol that are incredible. Their album came out about a month ago. It's called Glitter. And it's kind of, they've got a bit of a jazzy feel, but it's like Rage Against the Machine, but with a bit of noise rock, really, really interesting grooves. They've got a saxophone on it, which really, really sounds amazing. So I would check that out as well, yeah.
Oh, cool. I give you one in the land of noise rock. I don't know if you're familiar with a band called Tunic.
No, what are they called?
Tunic.
Tunic, okay, right.
They newly released a very emotional album that were about the singer and his wife miscarriage, and it has a fantastic song that are called The Sharpening of the Blade, and it's amazing.
You see, there used to be a band in Belfast called Tunic. It's not the same band, obviously.
No, I'm not sure, but if you like noise rock, I guess you probably like that band, and also Bronze on Arm.
No, I don't know that. No.
So go and check it out.
Bronze on Arm.
Oh, I can send you on the Instagram the album if you want.
Yeah, just send me a link to it and I'll listen to it. Thanks very much. Yeah, I'd like to hear that. So I've written that down. So I'm always up for hearing new stuff. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I always up to new music, but I must be serious with myself. It's always reminding me of the old bands. So if I listen to Tunic, that's because I love Jesus Lizard and Mike Birds.
Yeah.
That's for sure. But really, really, really a huge thank you for doing this lengthy conversation. It was a huge honor. It was a very interesting to hear you speak so much about the band and a band that I grew up with, sitting in my boy room. It's opportunity, and it was fantastic to have this nice chat with you, Andy.
Well, thanks very much, Famp. I really enjoyed talking to you as well, and thanks for getting in touch. It was really, really nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.